Hi everyone, this is chapter 8 on mental disorder, and my section is the very first and the popular beliefs. So Carrie Fisher suffered from bipolar disorder, which she did not seek help for several years because of the stigma of the mental illness holds. After trying to commit suicide by overdose of pills, she began treatment and she admitted that the road to recovery was hard and she got through it, and now sees herself as the poster child of mental illness. Many Americans suffer from bipolar disorder. According to a national survey, about half of all Americans have experienced at least one episode of psychotic disorder during their lifetime, and a quarter within the past year alone. Also, another shocking fact that all of us have been mentally ill at one point in time or another, in the same way as all of us has been physically ill, which is crazy to think because not only yourself has gone through this, but so many other people have gone through it. And it's no wonder that there's so many mass shootings and such high crime rate lately. So the next section is popular beliefs. So people always assume that mentally ill people are weird and not normal, which in fact they're normal people just like ourselves. There are so many misconceptions in judging a book by its cover. So there's multiple beliefs. The second belief is a mental ill person is hopeless and is incurable. Even after having treatment, people are still labeled as freaks when they have been cured. The third belief is that there is a sharp and clear distinction between mentally ill and mentally healthy, which there's a fine line between those two, but there's most doctors that can't even tell the difference between them, so it's kind of... So the fourth belief is a mentally ill are mostly crazed or violent, which doesn't help because the movies and media and television programs exaggerate that the mentally ill people that are crazy, and they're really not. The fifth is about a midwinter depression, which is also it's SAD, which stands for seasonal affective disorder, which happens in the middle of winter, where people are lonely and it gets really cold and the lack of sunshine. The sixth is using an antidepressant drug can cure depression, which research shows that people taking these drugs can recover from the depression. It's just not only the drugs themselves, but it's them, which doctors usually give patients a placebo pill, which is the sugar pill. Everyone's heard of that. The final belief is an epidemic of autism, which characterized by serious problems with language and social bondings, which, I'm kind of awkward at times, so it's just not that I'm autistic, it's just there's social problems and social norms that come along with it, and it's not because you're autistic. Alright, that's my section. Enjoy the rest of the chapter. Thanks!
My name is Liana Moreno, and I'm going to be doing the last section of Chapter 8, which is the impact of labeling. Sociologist Thomas Kuhn views mental illness as a myth and sees it as an ambiguous label. He calls mental illness residential rule-breaking because it is such a residue-diverse kind of rule violation that society does not clearly refine as rule-breaking. The mentally ill may only appear to violate social norms, but not in a way as criminals or other rule-breakers do. Most people do not regard the mentally ill as rule-breakers who should be punished, therefore they belong on the residential leftover category with deviants. The ambiguity of mental illness makes it easy for people to label a person as mentally ill. Few emphasize that labeling can lead to the person to develop stabilizing chronic mental disorders. Cube assumed that psychiatric symptoms arise from a diverse source which include genetic, biochemical, psychological, and psychiatric factors. Many people show psychiatric symptoms as hearing voices, seeing visions, or imaginary fantasy events. Yet their family, friends, or others who know them do not label them as mentally ill. Most symptoms appear in apparently normal people and last only a short period of time. A small minority of these people do get labeled mentally ill, which will eventually cause them to become chronic mental disturbed. According to Skew, once people are labeled mentally ill, they are encouraged to acknowledge the mental illness. If they refuse to see themselves as mentally ill, they will be forced to enter a mental hospital. After release, they may try to resume their normal lives, but they are likely to be rejected by others. They may become extremely confused, anxious, or ashamed. They tend to accept their family, psychiatric, and community judgment that they are mentally ill. Skew concluded that labeling a person mentally ill is the single most important factor in making the person become a chronic mental patient. Insanity versus super sanity.
Hi, my name is Dennis Lopez, and I'll be talking about the medical model, the psychosocial model, and the psychoanalytic theory. There are three different ways of looking at mental disorders, represented by the medical, the psychosocial, and the labeling models. The first two derive from the positive perspective, and the third from the constructionist perspective. I'll be talking about the first two. The medical model is one way of looking at mental disorders. It derives from the positive perspective. The medical model defines mental disorders as a disease with a biological origin. It's treated by physical means such as drugs, electric shock, or surgery. Medical and biological psychiatrists point to one of two kinds of evidence to support their belief in the biological causes of mental disorder. One type of evidence comes from studies on genetically related individuals. Another type of evidence comes from numerous cases of successful treatment of mental patients with antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. So because of these two evidences, we refer to these two as into the medical model. And these drugs treat only the symptoms but not the causes of mental disorders. So the symptoms will stop, but it will not cure the mental disorder. The other type of way to look at a mental disorder would be through the psychosocial model. And this psychosocial model is one way of looking at mental disorders. It derives from the positive perspective. This model can be found in many psychological and sociological theories. And one important theory out of these two is a psychosocial model. It can be found in the psychoanalytic theory. So the psychoanalytic theory is inside the psychosocial model, and this is one out of the two that are most important of theories that are inside this model. And the psychoanalytic theory is presented by Sigmund Freud a century ago. This theory traces mental disorders to some unresolved psychic or emotional conflict in the patient. To Freud, conflict is inevitable within the personality of every human being due to having three conflicting parts: the ID, the ego, and the superego. The ID consists of animal desires for sex and aggression. The ego is rational and logical, and the superego is roughly the same as a conscious. The ID and superego fight over many issues, and each time the ego will try to settle it. If the ego succeeds in resolving the conflict, the child will grow up to be normal. But if the ego fails, the unresolved conflict will develop into a neurosis or a psychosis. The conflict is usually such a painful experience that the patient represses it into the unconscious area, but manifests it into either anxiety, depression, or compulsion. This is the end of my parts on the medical, the psychosocial, and the psychoanalytic theory.